The bar was dimly lit, a haze of cigarette smoke curling lazily toward the ceiling, catching the golden glow of the hanging lights above the worn wooden counters. The low hum of conversation blended with the occasional clink of glasses and the scratchy twang of a jukebox playing classic rock. Patrons nursed their drinks, unaware, or perhaps deliberately ignoring, the unease that had begun to seep into the room. It wasn't the usual raucous Friday night energy. Tonight, the air felt heavy, tense, like a storm hovering just beyond the horizon. Then they arrived, the bikers. A pack of them, leather jackets and chains catching the dim light, boots thudding against the creaking floorboards as if marking a warpath. The sound of their entrance silenced parts of the bar. A few heads turned nervously, some men muttering under their breath, others leaning a little closer to their companions as if for protection. Their leader, a mountain of a man with a jagged scar running from temple to jaw, stepped in first, surveying the room with cold, sharp eyes. His gaze seemed to carve through the air, sizing up every person in the room like a predator evaluating prey. He didn't waste time. With a snarl that made the bartender flinch, he strode toward the waitress, a young woman with a calm demeanor that didn't quite mask the nervous tension in her shoulders. She had been carrying trays back and forth all evening, her steps light, careful, polite, trying not to disturb the fragile peace that hung over the bar. But she had no way of preparing for the brute who now reached out, grabbing a tray from her with a force that sent it wobbling dangerously in her hands. "Careful, sweetie," he growled, his voice low and rough, a mix of menace and amusement. She tried to pull away, but he had her firmly by the arm. A shiver ran down her spine, her fingers tightening instinctively around the tray. And then, with a sudden, shocking tug, he ripped her shirt. The sound of tearing fabric was sharp, almost deafening in the sudden silence that fell over the bar. Patrons froze mid-sip, eyes wide, hearts pounding. Some stood, some dropped their drinks, all of them watching in disbelief. The shock in the room was tangible, a living thing that pulsed like a heartbeat. But it wasn't just the violence that made the room freeze, it was what lay beneath. The waitress didn't flinch, didn't scream, didn't collapse like anyone might have expected. Her posture remained steady, almost defiant, even as her torn clothing revealed a shocking truth. Across her chest, under the remnants of her uniform, was a complex harness of leather straps, metal plates, and technology that shimmered faintly in the bar's dim light. Small devices blinked softly, embedded with sensors and wires that hinted at some highly specialized, almost futuristic purpose. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Some of the bikers hesitated, their swagger faltering as they took in the sight. Even the leader's scarred face twitched with something between surprise and apprehension. It was a look the patrons had never seen before, one that suggested he had realized instantly that this woman was far more dangerous than she appeared, far more prepared than any of them could have imagined. The tension was a living thing. Every eye in the bar followed the interaction, silent but electric with anticipation. The jukebox continued its music, a stark contrast to the frozen tableau in front of it. The bartender, usually gruff and unflappable, leaned over the counter, whispering to the man next to him. She's not just a waitress," he muttered. "That's some kind of combat gear, military grade, maybe. No one would wear that here for fun." Meanwhile, the waitress's calm did not waver. She gently pushed the torn fabric aside. Not with fear but with the precision of someone who had faced threats far worse than a group of drunken bikers. Her eyes locked on the scarred leader, sharp and calculating. There was a confidence there, a quiet but unmistakable authority that made even the other bikers take a subtle step back. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, assessing him as if evaluating a puzzle, calculating her next move with deadly accuracy. The leader cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the situation, but it was clear that his usual intimidation tactics had failed. The other bikers shuffled uncertainly, their bravado cracking as they realized that whatever they thought they were dealing with, it was far from what they had expected. One of them whispered, almost under his breath, "Boss, maybe we should just back off." But the scarred leader wasn't used to being second-guessed. He barked a laugh, trying to mask his sudden unease. "Back off, ha, look at this little." He stopped mid-word as he saw her stance shift, subtle yet unmistakable. Her fingers moved with a speed and precision that seemed unnatural, brushing along a panel embedded in her chest harness. A faint hum started to rise, almost imperceptible at first, but growing steadily, like a quiet storm building on the horizon. The room seemed to shrink around the sudden tension. Glasses rattled on tables. Chairs scraped against the floor. Patrons instinctively moved back, creating a semicircle of space around the pair, sensing without fully understanding that something extraordinary was about to happen. The scarred leader's bravado faltered, replaced by a flicker of calculation. He had seen enough to know he might be in over his head. And then it happened. The humming intensified, and the small devices across her harness blinked brighter, almost as if acknowledging a signal. Lights traced the contours of her body like a blueprint of power and precision. The waitress, who had moments ago seemed vulnerable and ordinary, now radiated an aura of controlled authority, one that made the bikers stiffen in instinctive fear. The scarred leader opened his mouth, possibly to command, possibly to threaten, but no sound came out as his eyes widened in realization. Patrons held their breath. Even the jukebox seemed to fade into the background, the music no longer relevant in the presence of what was unfolding. This was no ordinary waitress. This was a woman trained, armed, and ready to handle any threat. And in that moment, every biker in the room understood the truth. They had made a grave mistake, one that could cost them far more than bruised egos or torn jackets. The waitress finally spoke, her voice calm, steady, and unyielding. "I suggest you leave before this gets ugly," she said. Each word carried weight, authority that seemed impossible for someone her size, someone who had moments ago appeared vulnerable. Her gaze swept over the bikers, not with malice, but with precision, as if analyzing every weakness, every point of leverage. For the first time that evening, silence fell over the room, not the tense, anticipatory silence from before, but a silence of fear, of realization. The scarred leader's jaw tightened. He glanced at his companions, saw the hesitation in their faces, the uncertainty that had replaced their once unshakable confidence. Something shifted in the air, a collective understanding that tonight's encounter was no longer theirs to control. Then, slowly, the leader stepped back, a hand raised as if surrendering without words. The other bikers followed, their bravado dissolved into cautious retreat. Patrons exhaled in relief, the tension dissipating in waves, though the aura of awe remained. They had witnessed a transformation, a moment, when ordinary perception shattered, revealing extraordinary truth beneath the surface. And through it all, the waitress remained steady, her posture relaxed yet alert, a quiet storm contained within human form. She adjusted the torn remnants of her shirt, not in fear or shame, but with the grace of someone fully aware of the power she commanded. The bar, once filled with laughter and casual chatter, now held a reverent hush, a lingering recognition that something remarkable had occurred in the most unexpected of places. She picked up her tray again, not hurriedly, not in panic, but with deliberate, precise movements that made it clear she was still in complete control. Patrons watched, captivated, as she navigated the room with a newfound authority. Even the bartender, a man who had seen more bar fights and drunken brawls than he cared to remember, nodded subtly in respect. Some things could not be ignored, no matter how ordinary they seemed at first glance. By the time the bikers had exited, their departure was almost anticlimactic, the roar of their engines outside failing to match the silent impression they left behind. The bar slowly returned to its rhythm, the tension replaced by whispered speculation and awe. Everyone knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, something that would be talked about for weeks, if not months. Beneath the torn shirt, she wasn't just a frightened server. Strapped across her chest was an intricate harness of leather, metal, and embedded technology that glimmered faintly in the dim bar lights. The devices were small, complex, and obviously custom-built, an array of sensors, wires, and miniature panels that hinted at a lethal purpose. Patrons froze mid-breath. Even the bikers, who had come in expecting to intimidate, found themselves hesitating, confusion and fear flickering across their faces. Her hands moved with calm precision, brushing along the edge of a panel, adjusting something that clicked softly under her fingers. The humming that had begun moments ago now grew louder, subtle vibrations running through the floorboards and into the toes of everyone standing nearby. It was almost imperceptible, yet no one could ignore it. The scarred leader's bravado faltered. His eyes widened as he realized this wasn't some ordinary young woman. This was someone trained, equipped, and fully prepared for confrontation. "You've made a mistake coming in here tonight," she said, her voice low, steady, and commanding. Every word carried weight, resonating in a way that seemed to echo across the bar, cutting through the stunned silence. Her gaze swept over the bikers, analyzing every stance, every twitch, every subtle sign of intent. The leader tried to muster a laugh, but it came out hollow, unconvincing. For the first time in his life, he felt the sharp edge of uncertainty. Patrons watched, riveted, as the air shifted from fear to awe. The waitress's movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic. She flexed her fingers, and the lights embedded in her harness pulsed, casting eerie patterns across her chest. Some of the devices emitted soft, whirring noises, while others blinked in synchronized patterns that seemed almost alive. One patron whispered, "Is that tactical gear? Military grade?" Another muttered under his breath, She's some kind of operative." The bikers exchanged uneasy glances. Their earlier swagger was gone, replaced by hesitance. The scarred leader stepped back, his confidence crumbling. All right, he said, voice rough and uncertain. "No harm done. Let's just..." But she didn't give him a chance to finish. With a swift, fluid motion, she tapped a small panel near her shoulder. In an instant, a thin, nearly invisible wire shot out from her harness, wrapping around the lead biker's wrist. He yelped, stumbling backward, caught off guard. The harness responded instantly, delivering a harmless but immobilizing shock, designed to subdue without serious injury. Panic rippled through the rest of the bikers as they realized her capability wasn't a bluff. "Stay back," she warned, her voice now sharper, carrying an authority that made the room tense even further. "I will not hesitate to escalate if necessary." Her eyes never left the scarred leader, studying his every movement, calculating his intent. He froze, suddenly aware that the situation had flipped entirely. The predator had become prey, and everyone watching understood it. One of the patrons, a middle-aged man with a baseball cap, whispered to his friend, "I don't think any of us have ever seen someone handle a threat like that, in a bar of all places." Another nodded silently, eyes wide. The waitress was calm, collected, and completely in control, radiating a kind of focused power that sent shivers through the crowd. The leader tried to regain composure, flexing his hands, adjusting his jacket as though to assert dominance.